This transformation caught a lot of people off guard online because, according to most conventional hair loss advice, results like this aren't supposed to happen this quickly. Thinning at the temples, diffuse recession across the frontal area, a hairline that was clearly beginning to shift backward. And then, just months later, everything looked different. Denser, stronger, visibly fuller, almost like time had been reversed. So what actually happened here? Was it topical finasteride? Minoxidil? A change in lighting, styling, or camera angle? Or one of those rare hyper-responder cases people talk about online? Or is there something deeper going on that most people never question? Because when you start looking closely at modern hair loss treatments, you realize something uncomfortable. Some people barely maintain what they have, while others appear to recover an entirely different hairline. And the difference is far more complex than it first appears.
Before you can understand transformations like this, you need to understand what these treatments are actually doing. Because despite how they're often described online, they don't work in the same way. Topical finasteride targets one of the core drivers of genetic hair loss, DHT. Over time, DHT gradually shrinks hair follicles, not instantly, but slowly, causing hairs to become thinner, shorter, and less visible, until eventually they stop producing meaningful hair altogether. So when finasteride is used, the goal isn't immediate regrowth, it's control. It reduces the hormonal pressure driving that miniaturization process. And in most cases, the first visible result isn't new hair, it's stability, less shedding, slower recession, a pause in progression. Then there's minoxidil. Unlike finasteride, it doesn't act on hormones. Instead, it stimulates follicles that are still alive but underperforming. It extends the growth phase and encourages weaker hairs to grow longer and thicker than they otherwise would. And this is where most confusion starts, because both treatments get labeled as regrowth solutions. But in reality, they operate on different layers. Finasteride preserves what still exists. Minoxidil enhances what is still capable of growing. So the visible outcome isn't usually one dramatic shift. It's a combination of slowing loss, then gradually improving density in areas that still had potential. Which is why real results rarely look instant. They build slowly, through cycles of stabilization and incremental improvement.
Now, here's where things become less predictable. Because if treatments worked the same for everyone, results would look far more consistent. But they don't. Across hair loss communities, a pattern appears again and again. Some people maintain, some see modest improvement, and a small group responds in a way that looks dramatically stronger than average. These cases are often called hyper-responders. But this doesn't mean the treatment is stronger. It means the biology is responding differently. One factor is genetics. Hair follicles vary in sensitivity to hormonal change. For some, reducing DHT allows significant recovery. For others, follicles are already too far miniaturized or less responsive to change. Another factor is timing. The earlier treatment begins, the more follicles are still in a reversible state. They aren't gone, they're just weakened. And those are the ones that can potentially recover. Then there's follicle variability. Not all thinning areas are equal. Some regions still contain structurally intact follicles beneath the surface. Others are closer to permanent loss. So two people can look similar externally,
but have completely different internal potential. And finally, growth sensitivity. Some scalps respond strongly to stimulation from treatments like minoxidil. Others show only minimal change. So dramatic transformations usually aren't random. They come from a combination of genetic responsiveness, remaining follicle viability, and early intervention aligning at the same time. Which brings us to the part most people misunderstand, the timeline itself.
Hair doesn't grow continuously. It grows in cycles. And those cycles don't match how people expect results to appear. First comes shedding, often the most confusing phase, because shortly after starting treatment, weak hairs can fall out.
which makes things look worse before they improve. But biologically, this often reflects a reset as follicles transition into a new growth cycle. Then comes regrowth. New hairs begin to appear, but they're thin, soft, and uneven. Not the final result, just the beginning stage of recovery. This is where opinions split online. Some people see early improvement, others see nothing. Both can be true, because early regrowth is subtle and uneven across the scalp. Next is thickening. This is where visible change becomes obvious. Hairs darken, strength increases, density starts to return. This is often the first stage people recognize as it's working. Then comes stabilization, a long-term equilibrium phase, where shedding slows, growth becomes more consistent, and appearance levels out. But these phases don't happen neatly. They overlap. One area can be shedding, while another is thickening, while another is still in early regrowth. So when people show before and after results, they're compressing a long biological process into two static moments. And that's where most misunderstanding begins.
Not every transformation you see online is purely biological. Even real progress can look very different depending on presentation. Lighting is one of the biggest factors. Soft lighting reduces scalp contrast, making hair appear denser. Harsh lighting exaggerates thinning. Hair condition matters too. Wet hair clumps together, revealing scalp more easily. Dry hair expands, creating more perceived volume. Styling also plays a major role. Parting, direction, product use, all can change appearance without changing hair count. Hair length is another factor. Short hair exposes the scalp more. Longer hair creates overlap and coverage. And camera angle changes everything. Slight tilts can alter perceived recession. Zoom and distance can distort density entirely. So what looks like a dramatic transformation is often a combination of real biological change and visual conditions that amplify it.
So what actually matters in all of this? It's not that treatments are magic, and it's not that results are fake. It's that outcomes exist on a wide spectrum. First, consistency matters. These treatments only work when used continuously, not intermittently, not occasionally, but long enough for full hair cycles to play out. Second, early action matters. The more follicles that are still viable, the greater the potential improvement. Delay reduces that ceiling. Third, expectations matter most, because progress isn't linear. It doesn't move in a straight upward line. It moves through shedding, plateaus, gradual gains, and stabilization. So when you zoom out, these transformations aren't sudden events. They're long biological processes compressed into short visual snapshots. If you want to understand how people approach this more systematically, it usually comes down to structure, consistency, long-term planning, and understanding how each treatment fits into a broader routine. There are established approaches people use to manage hair loss over time, and frameworks that break down how to think about maintenance, expectations, and progression. If you want to explore that further, I've linked some educational resources below. Not quick fixes, just structured breakdowns of how these systems are actually used over time.